Okay, guys, and we're live. Welcome again to this new VJet session. So we had a couple of problems. We're probably going to tell you that about what happened offline, but that doesn't matter. We're actually doing live on the VJet here from Java 1, and we're happy to announce this new session with Nicolas and his book, Integration Testing from the Trenches. So I'm going to have to do like some jiggling over here because we're doing this on one single laptop, so I'm gonna have to turn it to Nicolas like that.
Hi guys, hello and welcome.
Say hi to Nicolas. And now on my left, I have Ivan, of course. So I'm not going to go into much details. We're supposed to do this from the demo grounds, but now we end up doing this from a dodgy corner on the Moscone Center on Java 1. So we're just sitting here on some chairs, and because I didn't have enough power, we have to do some corner over here. But anyway, let's start this session. So Nicolas, please, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nicolas Fränkel. I'm a developer. I've been doing Java development since 15 years. I've always worked in like as a consultant, going to customer and them asking me to do some stuff and me trying to do it.
Awesome. Well, Ivan, I think you don't need really introduction, but can you please say something about yourself?
I'm Ivan, and together with Roberto, I run the Virtual Jet Book Reading Club. So I'm really happy to have Nicolas today on our first topic about testing.
Yeah, and I'm Roberto. So I do the book reading club, work for Tommy Tribe, and mostly with Java EE stuff. I hope that you guys are hearing this properly because we also don't have mics. We should have mics, but we don't. So if you guys do not hear this properly, please let me know on the RC channel, and I'll try to make it better. But anyway, so let's start with some of the questions to Nicolas. So Nicolas, can you tell us a little bit about what was your motivation to write the book?
Sure. It's amazing that it has been like more than 10 years since Ken Beck talked about JUnit and unit testing and stuff. And there are a lot of books and methodology and blog articles and literature around unit testing and how you should do it properly, all the concepts, the methodology. And I mean, nowadays nearly everybody agrees on unit testing. But thing is like no one talks about it. And that's a real trouble. So before writing the book, I wanted to check if there is something around it, and there is none. Obviously, there is none. So I decided to try to do something about that, to try to talk to people about integration testing because it's very important in the life cycle of our project.
Awesome. So Ivan, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, so I'm also, as I told you earlier, I'm also happy to have finally a book reading club on a book about testing, especially of integration testing. So speaking about integration testing, would you please explain us what exactly integration testing is and how it correlates with unit testing? What's the difference and what are the different types of tests, if you wish?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I had once someone telling me that he did unit testing because he used JUnit. So obviously that's not the case. I like to have this analogy of a car, like you want to mass produce a car. And basically you can test every single nut and bolt and screw separately. And that is akin to unit testing. You want to make sure that every part of your car works well. But on the other side, this is not enough. You first want to create the whole car, take it on the test drive, and only then, if the test drive is successful, then you can mass produce it. And for me, testing every piece is unit testing, and taking the car on the test drive is integration testing. And of course, there is a whole nuance between like testing every single piece together or testing the whole system together. You can test some parts together, like the motor in itself, or just a tire, or I mean, I'm not a car expert, so I wouldn't go into too much detail here. But basically, it's like that. With unit testing, the scope of the system and the test is basically generally the class. In the Java world, it's a class. In different kind of language, it might be a bit bigger, but basically it's very limited. And when you do integration testing, the first thing that you have to think about is the system and the test. What would you want to test? And those are basically the differences between the two kind of testing.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we have these discussions is because a lot of people really mess up what's unit testing, integration testing. They don't really know the difference. And I think that you gave a very good explanation on what the difference between one is both. But by the way, let me just add something, which is there is also another kind of test, which is system test. And since we're talking about difference between tests, maybe you can also tell us what's the difference between system tests, so like our audience knows the difference between all of them.
Well, I mean, there is already like, once I stumbled upon the page and they describe like 100 different kind of testing. As you said, there is system testing, there is mutation testing, there is end-to-end testing, which is for me is the most extreme form of integration testing, where you test the system as a user. There is penetration testing, and there is security. I mean, you can test a lot different of stuff. So I prefer just to stick to the subject of integration testing and unit testing, because it makes up the most of my book, and otherwise, I mean, it opens the stuff really too wide.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, guys, our RC channel is open. You can send the questions live there. We'll be monitoring, so we can ask your questions directly to Nicolas. Also, you can post your questions on the. So please send us them, and we'll be happy to relay them to Nicolas. Ivan, I think that you have a couple of more things to.
Yeah, while we are waiting for our audience to ask their questions in the vidjuk.com website on the chat there. Let me ask you about something else. So unit tests, as such, they should be executed. They should be fast, right? Because you run them, you run all your suite maybe 50 or 100 times a day while you develop new features, or you do some fixes.
Yes.
While integration tests are not so fast per se. So do you know some techniques which you can share with us about separating them, either in separate projects, Maven modules, or using some naming conventions, so that I can quickly run my fast tests 10 or 20 or 50 times a day, while I run my integration tests probably once before I submit or something like this?
That's a very good question, and that's the real trouble, because you want your test, I mean, you want your test hardness to make you feel safe and secure, but if your tests take too long, then the problem is that it slows you down. So you have to find the right cursor between them two. Some integration tests might be fast. Basically, every integration test that doesn't rely on an external infrastructure resource, such as database or a web service or whatever, can be pretty fast anyway. So there might be integration tests, but they are fast. Now the problem is, once you have said that, there are still slow tests and fast tests. And the good thing is, if you are using a proper build tool, which of course you should, such as Maven, Maven has two plugins. So you've got the Surefire plugin, which basically everybody uses if you are using Maven, and it executes all tests that ends with tests, that starts with tests, or that ends with test suites. And it is bound to the I have a blank now. It is bound to a specific. It is bound to the test phase. Test phase. Thank you. It is bound to the test phase. What people don't know so much about is there is a copycat of this Surefire plugin called Failsafe. Surefire Failsafe. It's the same, which is intended to run integration tests. So basically, if you configure in your POM this Failsafe plugin, which is not by default. Surefire is bound to the test phase by default. Failsafe, you have to bind it to the force. Normally, there are 4 integration tests phases in Maven. You have pre-integration test, post-integration test, and afterwards you have verify, because you want to run everything and only then file the build. then you have to bound them explicitly. And then if you create your test and they end with IT or they start with IT, then they will be by default recognized by Maven as integration tests, and then they will run later. So basically, when you do your commits, you can have hooks that only MVN tests, and later on the continuous integration server, then you can run the full stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's very context dependent, because I mean, it depends on how many integration tests you have, how fast they are, and whatever. So that's the real problem of integration testing, is that it's very context dependent. Whereas unit testing is pretty much straightforward. You can find all the good recipe in a book. With integration testing, you have to think a lot about the context, whether it makes sense for you or not. But this is one way to separate between the fast and the slow test, and to like improve like your life cycle result and your feedback.
Interesting that you mentioned the file size plugin, because one of the things that I've been noticing on the Maven projects that I've been working in, and I've probably been working over 100 by now, is that only like a very small fraction of them really use the file size plugin. Most of them, they'll just put everything on the standard testing phase. I'm guessing that's one of the reasons why people confuse unit testing, integration testing. It'll just mix everything on the same life cycle on their Maven build. So there is really no separation over there.
Yeah.
So then there's no, they don't really understand how to separate the test. So
and it has a very bad
up.
Yeah, it has a consequence, is that in the end, then it slows down the testing phase, and the same people are bitching that integration tests take too much time, and then they remove them.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, you only have unit tests, which is really a bad idea, because everything there is no reason not to do integration testing. Really not.
Mm-hmm. Ivan, what do you have for us next?
So before I go on, let me ask you again, our viewers, let me ask you again to be more active, ask more questions, and to remind you that today we are discussing the first 5 chapters of our book, which are on the foundations of testing, developer testing tools, test-friendly design of your programs, automated testing, and infrastructure resource integration. So if you allow me, I should ask the next question.
Sure.
So it's on the developer testing tools. One of the tools in your toolbox is JUnit, and it's a powerful assert statement. So in your test, you assert whether something is true or false, or null or equal or whatever. For that, we usually use the JUnit assert class with its many static methods. So I've used sometimes I've used hamcrest matchers, which try to resemble some kind of natural language. Have you used hamcrest matchers, and would you recommend hamcrest matchers?
So first, there are several APIs that let you do this kind of testing DSL stuff. There is hamcrest, I think it was the first one, and then there is fast assert, and then there is AssertG. AssertG seems to be taking on quite a lot lately. And I mean, basically, they are more or less the same. The idea behind them is the same. They allow you to have a more natural way of making your assertions. And to be honest, JUnit or TestNG for the matter, they are very basic regarding assertions. And so it's not very readable. You should strive also to make your test readable. So regarding hamcrests itself, let's talk about, should you use a library that makes your assertion easier to read? And the answer is yes. Now, regarding should you code your own assertions and create more code that has to be tested, then probably I would say don't go into this direction until you really, really think this is a good thing. It's not because it's a law that you should do it. So always apply the KISS principle. Keep it simple and stupid. So use those libraries, use the APIs they allow you, but probably don't create your own hamcrest matcher unless you have a very specific domain they will be reused across all projects and so on and so forth. That's what I would recommend anyway.
And since we're out on the topic on about some tools, what do you feel about those natural expression tools where you just like JBehave or Cucumber, where you just try to express the test in a natural language?
So I used Cucumber recently on bound to Selenium. It's very, very powerful. It's very great. But I mean, again, it's all about striking the good balance between the time invested and the feedback you have. If you use JBehave or those BDD-driven tools, basically you should strive to use the semantics of the business. So you shouldn't use BDD to say, oh, I have a list and I put something in the list and blah, 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 and blah. You should really have business language. Because in that case, you want the business to understand what scenario you tested and where, if a failure happens, what feature it breaks. So it's not for low-level stuff. You have another problem is that these BDD tools, you describe the stuff in a text format, I mean, Gherkin or whatever, and then you have to code it. And there might be a gap between the text and what you code it. So you should have, again, you should tread carefully here. So perhaps not do it for everything. You should be in a very mature company where we'll write a test and people will code it. So it's not for, I guess it's not for everyone. It's not for every company. But if it works, then by all means do it. It's always, if you have never done it, you could do it and then assess the result, whether it was worth it or not, and then make your own conclusion regarding in your current context.
Awesome. Okay.
Cool.
I think we don't have any questions yet, even though we have a few viewers online with us. So once again, please take this chance to ask some questions to Nicolas. We'll be happy to relay these questions to him. In the meanwhile, we'll have Ivan ask one other question.
Yeah. So you, in your third chapter of your book, you say that we should design our applications to be test-friendly or testable. And one of the great tools there is dependency injection. So we should prefer using dependency injection instead of creating our dependencies in the code that uses them. Why is it easier to test? Well, because you can create at your test time, you can isolate them by the dependencies by using stubs, mocks, fakes, and other stuff. So when you say stub or when I say stub, different people think different things. So would you please summarize again for our viewers and your readers what is the difference between mock, stub, fake, and
And dummy.
Yeah.
So I'm not smarter than anyone. So basically, I use the definition by Martin Fowler, and he has a Blicky, not a wiki page, but a Blicky about that, where he describes what is a dummy, what is a stub, what is a mock, and what is a fake. So basically, a dummy does nothing. You just have to provide it to the API that you're calling because it's a required parameter. It won't be used in the test later to pass something. So if you need to pass null, if you need to pass a new date or whatever, that's the easiest way. And now comes the difference between a stub and a mock. And basically, a stub is something you would create yourself. Let's say that you are testing a servlet and you need to test the doGet method, and you need to have like HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. So you take the interface of HTTP servlet request and you call it according to your need. And if you could do the same for list, for example. The problem with that is that in some cases, just as Java util.list, you end up by having a lot of code to create that is only relevant to one of your tests. And that is pretty not great. I mean, and you are not sure even that would work. So came a generation of testing framework that lets you do that programmatically, using proxies or whatever, and such as Mockito. Mockito is one of the most well-known, whereas JMock, SEMock, the other kind of frameworks. In that case, you would ask the framework to create one class, whether it's an interface or class, and then you would code only what you need. And then you can afterwards check the state of the object. And finally, there is a fake. And fake is not at the same level as the other one. All what we have seen so far, dummy, stub, and mock, are at the API level, inside the language. Whereas a fake, generally, they are on the side of the component. You want to replace an external dependency. Let's say you want to not to use an Oracle database, because that means that you would need to set it up during the build, and that you don't want if you have an open source project. So you are using a fake database which does everything that the database would normally do. That you wouldn't rely on it on production. For example, you use H2 or HSQLDB or DB or whatever. So an in-memory database that would basically respect the same contract, so that GDBC API, but might probably diverge in the finer details. And that is a fake.
Okay. And so we were discussing a little bit about mocking and stubbing. So you already gave the example about TCP request. Can you give us a couple of other examples where people should go with one way or the other? How do you make that decision?
I always use Mockito and mocks, because really, and before I tried to create my own dummy, or not, I shouldn't use the word dummy. I use my own stub HTTP servlet request, and it was too much. It was really too much. If you are using Spring, on the other hand, for example, there is a module called Spring Test, whereas you already have like those testing of HTTP not testing, but just stubs for HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, HTTP session, and stuff. In that case, I would probably use them, because everything is already coded. And for example, the normal API for HTTP servlet request is to get parameter. But on the from Spring, then you have a set parameter, so you could very easily use it. So if there is an API that gives me all the stubs that I need, I use them. Otherwise, I use Mockito.
I see.
Cool. Forgot my question. Yeah,
okay, I'll leave you time.
I had another question on test-friendly design, but I forgot it. So let's go on. Let's go on with my question on the next chapter, which is automated testing. And there you talk about Maven bill of materials or BOMs. They're a really cool way to describe one big library containing multiple modules, so that you just depend on the BOM, on the version of the BOM, and then take those submodules that you need. So would you explain what is the how these Maven BOMs relate to testing and to integration testing?
It happens a lot that when you have very big frameworks which are really like componentized into different libraries, it's not practical to set every version separately. And so you have like Vaadin or Spring, or basically every framework that is really took the parts of the module to they offer a BOM generally, and then you can set the version of every component they offer in one go. Absolutely, I don't remember how it is relevant to integration testing. To be very honest, right now.
Okay, no worries. We'll get back to that on the next session.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, now I remember my question.
Oh, awesome.
There are some in-memory databases that we all use in our integration testing, and not only integration testing. HSQLDB, Derby, and H2. In your book, you recommend using H2 when possible. Would you tell us why? Would you tell us why we should use H2 and not the other ones?
So basically, H2 is the successor of HSQLDB because the main committer of HSQLDB left HSQLDB and went to create H2. So to be honest, I prefer to have the tool that is still the best maintained. But I mean, depending on your needs, you can use any of them. If any one of them fits your need, then I mean, be my guest. I found H2 to be a bit better regarding that you can set a compatibility mode depending on your database. So it might adapt to the syntax, for example, of Oracle or any other database. And then you can use a specific SQL like modified, deviating from ANSI SQL, and then it might be better. But if you are using standard SQL, then there is no really any reason to use one or the other. Still, I prefer H2 because, again, it's the latest one. I mean, I'm a geek. I want to use the latest tools.
Sure. And is there any situation where you will use like a real database for your testings?
Yeah. So basically, it's also a trade-off. And depending on your context, if you are using H2, you are not using the real database. So if you deploy on the real environment, then you might notice that something is not working with the real database. The question is whether you'd like to take the risk or to gain time during the test. If you are working in the medical industry, or if you are developing software for planes, I mean, very critical stuff, you want to take as less risk as possible. Whereas if you are like developing the next game for Candy Crush, it's not very important, right? So it's a trade-off. What you could do, for example, if you are working in the medical industry, you could have, and I did that actually in another context, but what we did is basically we asked our DBA to create a schema for every developer on the team, and during the build, we were able to get the Windows name of the guy, to map it to the name of the schema, and then to use only this database for the schema for the integration test. So every developer, and there was also one for the continuous integration server, of course, every developer could do his test in isolation from the other, and that's the most important stuff.
You just have like a situation where you have like I don't know, like a daily build where you'll use like the real database, and then the tests that you run on your local box will just connect to the memory database, something like that.
Yeah.
Will work.
Yes, that's perfectly possible. That's a very good strategy. In that case, you diminish the risk, and you still are very fast. And once per day, you assess the risk and check that everything works fine. So yeah, it's a pretty good strategy.
Okay.
Okay, so taking on from here, you mentioned in your fifth chapter of the book about the 3 strategies for testing database, 3 environment strategies for testing database. So the first one was running on your local machine, the database on your local machine. Then the second, I don't remember exactly what was the second and third. I think the third one was that you mentioned running on central database server. And I don't remember, honestly, the second one. So if you are running in production with MySQL or with Postgre, do you think that the first strategy, running with the database on your local machine, is a decent one? It's a pretty safe one.
Again, it depends. So basically what I describe in the book is Oracle. I use the example of Oracle. And you have basically 3 levels. You use a schema per developer. So you use a real Oracle database that is deployed in your environment. Or you use a local Oracle database on your laptop. Or you use H2 with compatibility mode or record. So in the first case, and going to the lowest, you have more confidence that it works really, that you are really testing and like minimizing the gap between the testing environment and the production environment. But the more work you have to do in advance because you have to create a schema, etc. Whereas if you are like an open source project and you don't want people to like set up their database before, then it's perfectly fine to offer integration testing with H2. If you have enough resources, if you have a good collaboration with DBAs, if you have enough money, if you have time, if everything is set, then nothing prevents you from having one schema per developer in every environment. So again, integration testing is very, very like hard to write because there is no one answer and it's a truth. It really depends on your current context and how you manage it. And I mean, it depends also on the relationship you might have with DBAs, for example. If you have a good relationship and they agree to give everyone a schema, fine. If it's not so easy, then perhaps you better go to H2.
Okay. Yeah, I'm guessing what our viewers are looking here is like trying to understand your views on what their context is and just try to see, okay, if you have this context, maybe go this direction. If you have that other context, maybe go that other direction. So, I mean, we understand that integration testing depends on a lot of bullet points, right? If you're working on this industry and if you have this specific problem, so you already have that example. If you're working on like aeronautics, I mean, if you're trying to send like a satellite into space, maybe you want to have to be super careful on what you're doing and want to try to make it as much real as possible, right?
Exactly.
Because if that fails, it's going to fail in a catastrophic way, and we already have a couple of samples of that happening, right?
Yes. Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. But if you're doing like a game, I mean, if people cannot play for like 1 hour or so, I mean, yeah, you're probably going to lose some money, but it's not really super critical, right?
And that's a very good example. Like on one end of the spectrum is gaming and whatever. In that case, you want to run your integration test very fast. You don't want to set up because your time to market is very, very, very fast. The most important stuff is how fast can I be? Then you should run very quickly, no setup, no whatever, be independent. In that case, use H2. At the completely opposite end of the spectrum, there is like surgery, medicine, aeronautics and stuff. And then you accept not to be as fast, but then to take no risk at all. Mm-hmm. And that's how your reasoning should be.
Okay. So basically you believe that on those part of situation we should invest more and have like a more well, I won't say like more complex setup, but at least a more real setup.
Yes.
On what you will have in a real production environment.
And in general, it won't even be your decision. You will have nice product or project manager who will tell them
sure.
That no risk, not at all.
Sure. But when so we're talking about it sometimes, and I'm guessing you also work with some teams. Sometimes I think developers don't really understand that, right? And they're always, oh, why do I have to keep with all this crap when we could just be so much fast? And they don't understand the risk behind what they're developing, right?
Yeah, that's a real issue. As a developer, you should really understand the big picture. That's many times working as an architect, whereas only the architects had to understand the big picture and the developers were kept in the black, which is very stupid. Everybody has to understand that kind of constraints. Because the constraints you understand is the constraints you accept. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand why you should do this and that, then probably you will bitch a lot about it and try to go to find some workarounds, let's say.
Have you seen some of those workarounds? Just out of curiosity, if you have something that you remember,
I'm thinking about it.
It'll be fun to share it with our audience.
No,
if not, that's fine.
I have had the developers bitching, but not really trying to game.
Okay. And what about you, Ivan? What do you have else for us?
I have a question for our audience. want to ask questions because I'm running out of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
yeah, well,
I
it's
still have,
super quiet at the moment, unfortunately. Actually, you have a comment with only for me, so I'll just keep it. But yeah, I'm sorry for us to be delayed. So I'm guessing that it drove some people away.
yeah, unfortunately.
But anyway,
Yeah,
do you have anything else for
yeah,
us?
sure. I've never used BDD Mockito. I saw it for the first time in your book. It's Mockito, but with when then. Do you use it, and is it part of the standard Mockito library, or I have to add another one in the? And do you recommend using that instead of standard Mockito?
So the question is, yeah, whether you should use the class. There is a class named BDD Mockito in the standard lib. It extends Mockito, by the way. So basically, you can access everything from the Mockito class from BDD Mockito, and whether you should use it or not. And the answer is a consultant's classical one. It depends. It depends. People are more receptive using this kind of testing because it nicely separates into given when then. Other are so used about the old classic style API that it just disturbs them. So it depends on your team, and I mean, I'm pretty open regarding that. For me, that is not the most important part. That is not the most important part. The most important part is, again, do integration testing, separate between the slow and the fast one, fake as much as possible your infrastructure dependencies because you want to be as independent as possible, and then the API style is not very important.
Okay.
Okay.
But at least would you recommend to be consistent? So if you use BDD Mockito, then use it all over your code, or if you use just Mockito, stick to that.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point. Whatever you are using, you should be every time consistent. Like if you are using JUnit, you should keep to JUnit. If you are using TestNG, which I would recommend for integration testing, then use TestNG. But don't try to mix and match because, I mean, at the end, nobody understands why you should do this and that. So, I mean, software projects are already complex. So don't try to increase the complexity by adding noise.
Okay. You just mentioned that you will recommend TestNG for integration testing. Can you tell us why?
Yeah. So basically, JUnit was the first framework, and it was very good, and everybody was happy and perfect. And then during a long time after Java 5 came out to exist, it didn't change. I don't know if you remember, but the methods that were executed were based on the name. It should start with test.
Test, yes.
And I mean, with annotations, it didn't make any sense. So someone started like a framework to use really annotation and not name-based convention, and it's TestNG. And I know that now it's JUnit 5 and it improves a lot of stuff. But until then, it was very, I mean, JUnit is not really made for integration testing. The first stuff is that basically you have only two hooks. It's before class and before method. I don't know the name. Before.
Just before.
Yeah, before.
It's before, and basically in TestNG it's before method. So you are very limited in your choice of hooks. In TestNG you have before shoot, or I mean you can do a lot. And if you have used before class, for example, then you know that it must be static. But must it be static? And it also cannot be protected. It must be public. And blah blah blah. And TestNG make it so much easier. I mean, to really code like you want. Like I don't want to expose everything to the outside world, and to still achieve what you like. That I always preferred to use TestNG. Parameterized tests. I mean, that's crazy in JUnit how to do that.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to create a constructor, which takes, and in TestNG, you just have the add data provider, add data, and then you're done. And you create your data in the dedicated method. It's very simple, very simple. And it's still maintained. I mean, a great framework. If you don't use it, then really have a look at it, because it really makes sense.
Okay. And you believe that even with JUnit 5 release, it's still lacking?
There is a killer filter in TestNG that JUnit will never achieve, because as its name implies, it's called JUnit. It's made for unit testing. And TestNG lets you do something that is completely antithesis of unit testing. It lets you create dependencies between your methods. It lets you tell, you can in TestNG tell that this method is dependent on another one and on another one. You should never do that in unit testing. But the scenario that I found very easy to explain that JUnit is not fit for is an e-commerce shop. Let's say you want to integration test an e-commerce shop. And first you want to put stuff in your cart, and then afterwards you might want to go to checkout, and then you want to pay, and then you want to confirm. The problem, if you have JUnit, then you have one big test method. And if the test breaks, it's very hard to debug. I mean, you have to go to the line, understand what happened. The natural way to do that is to create one method for every step. But if you do that with JUnit, you can order them, but you should really find very strange names so that JUnit pass them in the order you want it.
Or in an alternative, which is a pain, you'll have to like provide the data like separate on each method, which pretty much consists on the data on the previous method or something like that.
But I mean, it's not super convenient.
Yeah.
Whereas in TestNG, you would say, hey, my first method depends, my last method depends on the before last, and blah blah blah. And then when it breaks, you already have the name of the method. That is semantically, of course, you design it in a very nice way, so that when the test breaks, you know directly in which step it broke, without even thinking. Even if you do your test right, you might, even a business user could read that. The alternative is to use Cucumber, for example, to order that. It also works, but I mean, it goes one level up, and again, it's back to getting collaboration with the business so that they scrap the test and blah blah blah. So if you are stuck at the developer level, then use TestNG and use the depends on.
The same feature you get from Archelion, where you have the sequence annotation where you can specify the order of the test, but Archelion is you pay the price by making your tests slower than it might be.
Yeah, because in that case you need the test to be deployed in a Java EE container and blah blah. And perhaps you're outside of Java EE. I mean, I don't know. By the way, Archelion is a very good piece of technology. If you are using Java EE and if you are a provider of software that needs to deploy on, I don't know, N supported servers, you should really use Archelion. It's really great.
Yeah, we'll discuss it next time. You have no problem. You have a chapter on this.
Yeah. And we're pretty much going into the end of our sessions. I think we still don't have any questions from the audience. Let me check it out. So there's nothing on IRC. There is nothing on the live chat. But I think Ivan still has like one last question for us, right?
Yeah. I was pretty impressed because I needed to test in one or two projects. I needed to test sending emails, and I was not doing that because I didn't know about this green mail project that you mentioned in your fifth chapter. So is it really easy to test with green mail? I mean, should I just provide different configuration to my email service if I have one, and point it to green mail, and is that enough?
Yes. Basically, I mean, green mail was just an example. That's something that exists. To be honest, I didn't use this kind of feature for like some years, so perhaps now it has stopped. It has stopped being developed. In that case, what I wanted to tell to the readers is that if you are dependent on an infrastructure resource, you should find a fake, because the problem is that you can mock everything that sits inside the system. But like if you want to access a database, you need a fake. Otherwise, you will need to mock what? To mock the database. It doesn't make any sense, because then you would provide both the questions and the answer at the same time. And you want your query to be like parsed and stuff. The same reasoning behind. And as for every infrastructure resource, you need to code or to use the Java EE feature that lets you be independent as much as possible of your environment. So if you are using a mail server or whatever, then you should design your class accessing the mail server and providing the API to allow this kind of property injection or property reading at every time during the setup of your application. And that is very important. I mean, or you cannot do it, but then you will very soon notice that you forgot something. I mean, in that case, you will be beaten very fast.
Okay, that was awesome. Well, I think that we are running out of time. So I would like to thank Nicolas for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for
this
listening.
first session and with
Thank
this
you.
book. Thank you so much, Nicolas.
I have a small gift for you.
Oh, thank you so
great.
much. We usually don't have time. We usually don't have chances for gifts because we also do these online.
Yeah, but now we are we are on live.
Yeah.
So here is one for you.
Oh, awesome!
Oh, great.
I always love to have the printed books. So
And here is one for you.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
You're so kind.
but now you need to sign it.
Ah, okay. We might do it offline then.
Yeah,
Okay, of
sure.
course. Yeah, offline. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us and Nicolas
again.
for this session. We're still gonna review the rest of the books in some future session. We don't have a date yet, but stay tuned to the Meetup website, and we'll publish the next session we'll do with Nicolas. Next time, probably we'll do it from our homes. And I'm sorry for these somehow awkward session, but I think that it worked very, very okay. So thank you so much, guys, and
Thank you for joining.
say bye-bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, guys, see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.